President Biden, our ally, Israel's ally, has said in terms, if they go into Rafah, I'm not supplying the weapons. Will you say the same?
Well, we don't believe they should go in for a major operation in Rafah unless they have a plan to move people out of the way and to make sure they have shelter and food and medicine. We haven't seen that plan, so we don't support a major operation.
What's crazy as well is that since Netanyahu said, we're definitely going into Rafah and you can't stop us, the rhetoric has changed, where initially people like Cameron and his junior ministers from the Commons said things like a Rafah operation is unconscionable and should not go ahead. And now it's moved to, well, but there shouldn't be one unless there's a plan. An evacuation plan, also forced transfer, that violation of international law that they keep doing. Again, they've tried to get people out of Rafah by forced transferring them somewhere else, at the same time as trying to force transfer people out of Jabalia because they're engaging in another incursion in North Gaza as well, which again is forced transfer. Forced transfer of a giant civilian population whilst closing all of the crossings in violation of the provisional measures handed down by the ICJ, trying to essentially, death march these people, miles and miles across the strip with very little actual provision for food, which, to be fair, David Cameron did mention he has been forthright about the need for trucks of aid to get into Gaza, probably because he's been facing pressure from the Foreign Affairs Select Committee by Alicia Kearns. This should not be the red line of, well, you can invade Rafah, just make sure you have a plan. No, don't do it. You said they shouldn't be doing it months ago, and now you're saying, well, it's fine as long as they have a plan, we just haven't seen the plan yet. Constant moving of the goalposts because they don't want to upset, again, their little emotional support ethno-state.
In Rafah. But I do think the US and UK are in quite different situations. The US is a massive bulk supplier of weapons, sort of state to state. We don't do anything like that. Indeed, UK export of weapons under our very strict licensing system is less than 1% of Israel's weapons.
Oh, so for only kind of a tiny bit an accessory to war crimes, that's fine, right? As long as it's only like a small teeny bit, only like a small bean war crime, then it's fine, and the US are really to blame. So we can keep sending the shipments because we're only a small amount of war crime. That's fine. Israel can have a little bit of our weapons for war crimes as a treat.
I'm literally a communist.
But this is a question of principle, though, isn't it? President Biden has very clearly said, if you take this action, there will be this consequence. It's not about how much is supplied, is it? It's about the principle. And
I think the principle, in our case, is that we have a very strict system based on legal advice to the Foreign Secretary. And our job is not to publish that legal advice or comment on the legal advice. It's to act consistently with it. And that's what we do. It's a rolling process that looks at what Israel is doing, looks at humanitarian aid, looks at the treatment of detainees, and crucially, looks at the behavior of the Israeli Defense Forces and asks that central question, is there a serious risk of a serious breach of international humanitarian.
And yes, as we know from the leaked information from what the head of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, Alicia Kearns, has said specifically, is that there is belief that these weapons will be used to violate international law because the IDF have done so on multiple occasions, consistently and constantly. So all of this stuff about, well, we have legal advice but we won't publish it, but we assure you everything's fine. We have the leaked audio, mate. This is pure gaslighting.
Humanitarian law.
And now, at the moment, the answer to that is...
The answer up to now has been that we've allowed the export licensing to continue, but that's a rolling process. And we work on the basis of the advice.
But in terms of President Biden's very clear now warning that if they go into Rafah, you've said you don't want them to go into Rafah. He said there will be a cost. And that's not just about what's actually...
And again, really worth pointing out, he did explicitly release the legal advice they were given about the attacks on Houthi militants in the Red Sea. They were very happy to publish their legal advice when it said that they were absolutely within their right to engage in targeted strikes on Houthi targets. Will they indeed release the legal information about weapon sales to Israel? No. Weird how the ones that we know that they're now lying about, they will just not publish the advice because one would assume it will be damning for them, but they will spread the word far and wide about their legal advice on attacks on Houthi militants because it agrees with them. Makes you wonder what they're hiding, right?
Actually sent or supplied. It is also about a powerful diplomatic message. It is about a principle. One of our viewers wanted us to ask you about this. Dee Thomas has been in touch to say, this is a point of principle. Regardless of the amount of arms supplied, the act of stopping the delivery carries a much, much stronger
It's
message.
undoubtedly true.
And again, as somebody in chat pointed out, like if it's only a tiny amount of shipments, then Israel's not going to miss it. We're not going to have any kind of broader material impact on what happens during the war, but our state will uphold the principles of international law and the rules-based order and, basic morality. But of course, what it's actually about is geopolitics. It's about wanting to seem to be the ally of Israel and not to piss off Benjamin Netanyahu at the end of the day and other figures within the Israeli government by seem to be abandoning the state rather than the morals, rather than the principle, rather than the commitment to international law. And this is why this kind of, well, it's only a small amount, so who cares stuff, is so powerful as far as David Cameron is concerned, because it allows him to brush off the criticisms whilst maintaining this geopolitical stance of impunity, essentially, complete impunity for the actions of the Israeli government.
We could, if we chose to, make a sort of political message and say we're going to take that political step. Now, the last time I was urged to do that, just a few days later, I didn't do that, and just a few days later, there was a brutal attack by Iran on Israel, including 140 cruise missiles. So it's not sort of, tiny drones, huge cruise missiles blasting into Israel. And I think it would have sent entirely the wrong message. It would have been a very unwise move. So, as we stand here today.
And again, I disagree with Iran launching a strike. I think that it would have been potentially, and it was potentially escalatory and might have led to a region-wide conflict. But, and this is a big but, it was retaliatory. Israel struck first by violating the Vienna Convention and bombing the consulate in Damascus, which is the sovereign territory of Iran. That's casus belli. Luckily, Israel and Iran haven't escalated much further, but the attacks by Iran were explicitly targeted at military facilities. And again, I said this before and I'll say it again. Imagine if those military facilities had been struck and civilians were quote-unquote caught in the crossfire. Do you think people would have been talking about Israel using human shields? I can guarantee you they wouldn't have done, even though the Tel Aviv IDF headquarters is literally within a civilian neighborhood. But the airbase that was attacked by Iran, or was the initial target, I guess, although most of the missiles and drones didn't reach the targets because they were shot down by Israel and British and American Air Force, they would have actually hit a military base that wasn't near any civilian population centers at all.
I think there is a better answer, which is, Hamas must take the hostage deal. You get the pause in the fighting. You build a ceasefire out of that.
David, come a little bit closer, right? Come on. Hamas have accepted the peace deal. They have accepted the ceasefire deal. They have accepted a deal for the return of the hostages, for an end to the war. Do you know who turned it down? It was Benjamin Netanyahu, David. It's your ally in this you need to persuade, not Hamas.
I think actually just to simply announce today we're going to change our whole approach to arms exports rather than go through our careful process. It would strengthen Hamas, it would make a hostage deal less likely. I don't think it would be the right approach.
So is President Biden wrong to take that approach then?
He is in a totally different position. They are a massive state. To them, it's not so much a principle, because actually they are a massive state supplier of weaponry. They're involved in the IDF tactical and strategic thinking. It's a totally different situation. And I'm not really...
I mean, yeah, it is worse. Like, the US are doing things that are worse. They are indeed more culpable.
You are a liar.
The United States is somebody who has more blood on their hands than we do. But you can't just say, oh, well, look at that guy covered in blood. That means my one hand covered in blood is completely innocent. Because it's just not true. Again, this goalpost moving. We can supply Israel with arms because it's only going to be accessory to war crimes in a limited and specific way. Honestly, it's just...
That is a disgrace.
Yeah, literally, it is a disgrace. It is absolutely a disgrace.
What I want to do is make sure British policy has impact. We've got three things we want to achieve. We want to stop the fighting, get the hostages out, and remove the Hamas threat. We want to get aid into the Palestinian people in Gaza.
And we'll talk about that.
We crucially want the long-term solution of the two-state solution that Nadine was talking about.
And
what I measure is, are we making progress on those things? That's frustrating. Not enough aid is getting through, but we're hammering away every day on open the port of Ashdod, get this pier built off the Gazan beach, switch on the water and the fuel back into Gaza, get the 500 trucks a day. That's what we're doing, hammering away on that, because that will make a real difference. I'm not really interested in the sort of...
Yeah, true. We're asking Netanyahu to do all of these things that he definitely doesn't want to do. What leverage are we using to try and get those things? We're saying, please, Mr. Netanyahu, please, Daddy Netanyahu, please put the trucks in. That's it. That's our leverage. Pretty please, can you please do the thing that you don't want to do? Can you please indeed acquiesce to a two-state solution that you will never acquiesce to because the Likud Party charter explicitly says that they don't want it? But we'll keep sending you the weapons, we'll keep backing you diplomatically, we'll keep giving you cover to commit war crimes. But pretty please, Daddy Netanyahu, can you please indeed do the thing that you don't want to do? Pathetic. Totally pathetic. Yeah, do a McDonald's. Send Netanyahu a strongly worded letter.
Sort of message sending. I'm interested in what can we do to maximise the British pressure and the outcome that will help people in their lives, including getting the hostages, including British nationals, by the way, released.
You seem very frustrated by what's happening.
It is frustrating because, I am a supporter of Israel, I'm a supporter of the two-state solution, but I'm a massive believer in the importance of getting aid through to the Palestinian people. We had some big promises from Netanyahu a few weeks ago, and we've seen some changes that are positive, but not enough. And so I was on the phone to Ron Dermer, who's sort of Netanyahu's right-hand man in the cabinet, for an hour on Friday, making these points. It's not all bleak, though. I mean, on the issue of the treatment of detainees, I went to see Netanyahu. I said it wasn't good enough, that we needed to have a proper independent system for inspecting and regulating, and the Israelis have announced they're now going to do that. So we shouldn't overstate what Britain can get done, but nor should we understate it.
What's interesting...
I mean, it is true that we don't have as much leverage as other people. Like that's fine. Again, it's just we have no leverage if we refuse to call out war crimes and if we continue to send them arms and give them diplomatic cover and talk about, well, they need to do what they need to do because all of these things, #Hamas, whatever it is. That's the problem, again. Like, he thinks that pressure involves asking nicely. That's not how pressure works. Again, it's a material thing. Material pressure, which we won't get. At least Biden understands that pressure involves saying, we won't give you this thing if you do the Rafah incursion, which was the weapons shipment. Whereas we're saying, go ahead, have them anyway, but pretty please be nice with them, which will achieve literal nothing. Absolutely nothing.
In the context of all of this, is the United States, our very close ally, said on Friday in their report looking at what was happening in terms of breaches of international law, they said it was reasonable to assess that there were breaches of international law going on. Are they wrong?
Well, we certainly haven't given Israel a clean bill of health. And on the issue of humanitarian aid, I've repeatedly said that the Israeli performance isn't good enough.
But in terms of this point about breaking international law in the way that the war is being conducted, the State Department has said it is reasonable to assess...
Yes, I heard that. We have a different approach, which is we have a legal assessment comes to the Foreign Secretary. We don't publish that legal assessment. We don't comment on the legal advice, but we...
Unless, of course, it's about strikes on the Houthis, in which case we broadcast it to the entire country. Because you did that. You did that literally within the same broader conflict. You literally published the legal advice, or a summary of the legal advice, about the legality of strikes against Houthi militants in the Red Sea. Again, there's a reason why you publish one and won't publish the other, and I think I know what that reason is.
We must act in a way that is consistent with it. And, of course, as we do that, we make statements to Parliament, we give interviews like this to explain our approach. And as I say, Israel has not had a clean bill of health. On humanitarian aid, there have been real failings and they need to do better. But on the crucial question we have...
It's not just failings. They are violating provisional measures handed down by the highest court in the world, David. The highest court in the world said they had to open up and maximise aid deliveries into Gaza. It took them months after those provisional measures were handed down for them to open the Eret crossing in the north. A basic thing that the provisional measures mandate that they must do. And they didn't do that for months. And now they've closed them all again because of their incursion into Rafah. And yet again, what's your leverage for this? Pretty please stop. Pathetic. Totally pathetic.
Have to answer, which is there a serious risk of exports being used for a serious breach in international law? Up to now, in the assessments we've done, we've continued with the export licensing, but it's a rolling process and it looks at what is happening on the ground.
So are they on notice then? I know you've used the phrase a rolling process several times.
In a way, they're permanently on notice because it's a permanent process and it's not just open source material and what have you. We go back to the Israelis and we point out individual instances we're concerned about and ask questions about that, as I did with the detainees. Mm-hmm. Sometimes we get good answers and sometimes we don't, but it's an ongoing process. So it is, in spite of what the Labour MP said over there, it is one of the most rigorous processes anywhere in the world.
But just to explain that, it's interesting there, you're suggesting that essentially British government lawyers go to the Israelis and say, explain yourself on this incident.
Yes, that's absolutely the process. So, as part of the assessment, there are the issues which we're concerned about, including on humanitarian aid, and then we go to the Israelis and ask a series of questions about individual incidents, but also crucially on the humanitarian aid, where I'm pushing the hardest, because of our engagement. My envoy on humanitarian aid, Mark Bryson Richardson, next week will be in the room with the Israeli relevant cabinet minister, going through all of those bottlenecks about where aid isn't getting through. As I say,
the bottlenecks of all of the closed crossings, because Rafah is closed, Kerem Shalom is closed, Eretz is closed. All the crossings for aid are now closed. They have been for days, almost a week at this point. All these crossings have been closed. Aid is not getting in at all, again in violation of provisional measures handed down by the International Court of Justice, specifically in response to the South African claims to prevent the genocide of the Palestinians. And yet here you are saying, oh, I'm trying really hard, people are dying now. You absolute monster, David. Trying to pass him off, pass his actions off as being like he's somehow in a noble position whilst just playing diplomatic cover for a country trying to engage in war crimes. It's so beyond the pale. It's honestly beyond the pale.
What matters to me is, are we making an impact on those three things we're trying to
No.
fix?
One of the ways that other countries are trying to have impact on humanitarian aid is funding being restored to the UN relief agency, UNRWA. Now, it was investigated over claims that some of its staff had links with Hamas, but that investigation has been done. And other countries, there has been enough in that investigation that has come out for other countries, including Canada, Australia and Sweden, who have started giving it money again. Now,
again, because those allegations turned out to be absolute nonsense. What's that? A report being delivered by the Israeli government turned out to be full of lies? Oh, mind blown. How shocking. How absolutely shocking. Porkies, indeed, one might call them. You know a lot about porkies, don't you, David?
if you care, as you appear to do very passionately, about getting aid in, why not turn the taps back onto that aid agency that is on the ground?
Well, I'm being a bit more demanding because there were two reports. There was Catherine Colonna, my former French counterpart, and she did a good report and some good undertakings were made. But the actual investigation is done by something called the OIO, the Office of Independent Operations. They haven't yet completed their report. And I want to see real undertakings from UNRWA, including from Philip Lazzarini, the man that leads it, that they are going to investigate these things properly, that it won't happen again, that changing their procedures and everything else. Because it's not, you can't expect.
How about we do that after the people stop dying? Like, the humanitarian crisis is happening now. You can do all of this investigation stuff that, I think is, for most people on UNRWA, it's probably second to the fact that they're trying to stop people dying because of the whole humanitarian crisis thing. Maybe we leave that until later. Maybe we should never have suspended the money that we were giving them in the first place until the investigation from the Israeli side had been given completion. No, a couple of completely unfounded allegations, and we're very happy to just throw the Palestinians into a humanitarian crisis world. See, all it takes is Elon Levy going, "Ooh, Hamas bad, but UNRWA are Hamas," and then immediately all of the taps get turned off. Honestly, these people.
To pile back in and start funding an organisation when some of its own workers were involved on October the 7th.
Now, we recognise are good enough for some other countries, though.
Well, I'm being more demanding. We haven't seen the investigation.
The OIO report has said they can't finish the report due to records being destroyed in airstrikes. Of course that's why. David's like, well, we can't help the people who are being killed by airstrikes because all of the information that we need to absolve the group who are helping them survive the airstrikes has been destroyed by airstrikes. You couldn't make it up. You couldn't make this up. You could not make this shit up.
Investigative report into what actually happened. So I want to see both of the reports and then we'll make our decision after that.
In terms of another idea that could have helped, however, there was a proposal that UK troops could have been what was called wet boots on the ground. They could have gone and helped on the beaches in Gaza, taking aid from a pier to be built by the Americans directly in. Why is that not happening? Well,
so we are playing a very full part in this, where in terms of the whole movement of aid from Cyprus to either Ashdod port or onto the pier on the beach in Gaza, it will be a British Royal Navy ship, RFA Cardigan Bay, that will be one of the sort of logistic hubs off the pier. But the view the Prime Minister took and I took and others took was actually putting British boots onto the beach was not a good move. It's not necessary. There are other people that can do it.
Who's going to do it then?
I think it'll probably be via a contractor, and it will be secure and there will be...
I love how this is answer to everything. Well, actually, it's not effective to use the UK military to do it. We're going to subcontract it out to G4S. Just the Cameron way, isn't it? Why use a state body to do it when we can subcontract it out to some of our mates from the private sector? I'm sorry, I shouldn't laugh at this because it's really despicable. This whole interview has been an absolute nightmare. But it is very funny to me that the immediate response of David Cameron to how do we get aid into Gaza? Have we considered giving a contract to Serco?
Zara, what did you make of what David Cameron had to say?
I've heard the same lines that I've heard in Parliament. I don't know how government ministers can continue saying that we have this robust licensing system with a straight face, which is strictly not true. The comments about how small the trade is compared to the US is completely irrelevant. It doesn't matter. Our licensing law, our domestic law, as well as international law, has a principle that if there is a clear overriding risk that arms or components of arms could be used to facilitate or be complicit in violations of international law, that those arms should be suspended. That has not happened.
But do you think Foreign Office lawyers are getting it wrong? I mean, it was interesting, the Foreign Secretary described it.
But he is lying. We know that the leaked advice has been there. We all heard Alicia Kearns say it, Laura. Why are we just acting like this never happened? Why are we acting like it's just something that never occurred and we haven't all heard what she said about the legal advice? UK government lawyers say Israel is breaking international law, claims top Tory in leak recording. Chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, Alicia Kearns, said at a Tory fundraiser that legal advice would mean the UK has to cease all arms sales to Israel without delay. Head of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee talking about legal advice given to the government. Why do we not talk about this? Why does this never get talked about on any of these programmes? The comments made by her at a Tory fundraising event on the 13th of March, so like 2 months ago, are at odds with the repeated ministerial denials and evasions on the issue. And she even stands by her comments and called for the government to come clean. I remain convinced the government has completed its updated assessment on whether Israel is demonstrating a commitment to international humanitarian law, and that it has concluded that Israel is not demonstrating this commitment, which is the legal determination it has to make. Transparency at this point is paramount, not least to uphold the international rules-based order. Black and fucking white. Hey there, if you enjoyed the video, make sure that you like and leave a comment. That helps the video out in the algorithm. If you subscribe and ring the bell, it'll let you know when I go live. I stream every day on YouTube and Twitch. You can also follow all of my socials down in the description. And if you want to support me in a more financial manner, there's a join button for membership to just 99p to be a member on YouTube, as well as a Patreon, and there's some merch there as well. And hopefully I'll catch you on the next video. Take care.